Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this first episode of Go Big or Go Home Basketball. Youngster, I'm excited. It seems like just yesterday we were talking about March Madness. We've been talking about Big Ten football for the last, 6 months, 5 months. But now we've decided to do Go Big or Go Home Basketball, Go Big or Go Home Football. It's going to be a fun show. College basketball starting. But here's my thing, youngster. You know me. I love indulging in a very good cupcake for personal consumption. However, I'm not a fan of college basketball in the month of November, and you know why. We just went through a couple of teams, and even my Wisconsin Badgers, South Carolina State, Yale. But they've got a tough game coming up. Rutgers, what did they play? Central Connecticut and City of New York College or New York City College or something like that. These teams are playing no one right now, and so it's good exhibition. I understand that. So I don't get real into, this so-and-so is playing great and so-and-so and this team is looking really good until you play somebody. Now, I know Michigan and Duke play early. So that's good. We're going to talk about that, our Michigan State and Duke. But for most of these teams, it's Cupcake City, lots of frosting, lots of sprinkles, all kinds of things going on. And just one of those things where it's like, are you kidding me? Because you should be winning. And that's the way that it works. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to it. It's just for me, only if there's games like Thursday night, I'll watch Wisconsin, Xavier, Michigan State, Duke, definitely going to tune into that. But for the most part, these teams are in their tune-up mode for at least 6 games or so, somewhere in there, 7 games. And they got to get the wins. Unfortunately, there's one team in the Big Ten we're going to talk about a little bit later, Indiana. Actually, I don't know if they considered Indiana State a cupcake, but they already lost. Indiana's, I believe, the only team in the Big Ten right now as we record this show that has a loss. You can correct me if I'm wrong, youngster, but They lost to Indiana State. I'm sure that's got to sting just a little bit. Got to sting. But I'm going to turn it over to you. How are you doing? I just get so excited. I had to get into the show. I had to start talking basketball because I'm extremely excited about we're doing 2 shows for Go Big or Go Home now, but how's everything going?
Things are going well. There's nothing more to comment about myself. I don't care about myself right now. I care about college basketball, hence why we have split off and decided to do this show aside from football because our football shows don't have a time limit. And for those listening to this show, maybe haven't ever listened to us before, we have done a college basketball season almost, not necessarily through and through, but we started in very early January. For the 2016-17 season. This is the 2017-18 season. So last season in the Big Ten, we started in, basically January 2nd or whatever it was. Did an all-basketball show, essentially up until football, had some little sprinklings in of other sports. And then the other Big Ten show that we do, Go Big or Go Home. I mean, this is also Go Big or Go Home. It's just kind of going to be the basketball edition. While the other one's football for now. But essentially this show that we do, Troy and I, we don't have a time limit on. And so we'll go on and on and on, but we don't want to keep listeners forever. And so we also do a couple other shows together that are on 1-hour time limits. So we're conscientious of how much time we are using to an extent. Not going to say that we are certainly perfect on it with this show. The other 2 shows that we do, we're getting pretty good at sticking with an hour. But this show, it just kind of goes left and right, and especially with kind of a college basketball season preview show for the Big Ten.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, youngster, here's why these Go Big or Go Home shows go so long. It's college sports. And you've heard me say this a million times on this show, other shows. College athletics to me is perfect in the sense of competition. These kids go out and play. Take all the political stuff out, all the other crap that we talk about sometimes. But when it comes to competition, you can't ask for more because 95% of people playing are not playing in the pros. And they go out every game and play their hearts out. I love college athletics for that fact. That's why it's so intriguing to talk about. I'm so glad we're doing a show just from the Big Ten, because most of these players, you're never going to hear from them after they graduate because they're not going to make it in the pros. There's a select few that will, but a lot of times, Kevin, we're talking about underdogs, and you know I love the underdog. And I'm going to jump on underdogs bandwagons all the time. But that's why the show goes so long, because we can go on and on and on, because the competition is awesome at the college level. And, again, take away all the political BS, take away all the corruption, all that stuff. When it comes to the true competition side of it, I love it.
Yeah, there's no question about that these kids care every single game, because a lot of them know that this is, if you're a senior, there's probably a 99% chance that these players, and probably not in the Big Ten, it's not 99%, it's probably like 97%. It's still way up there. But if you're a senior in the Big Ten, very good chances are this is your last year playing competitive basketball in your life. You can obviously have rec leagues and whatnot going forward for you, but most of these players are not making the NBA. That's just the reality of it. Occasionally, you'll get one from every team. Some teams will have two. But, Michigan State this year is one of those dominant teams that in college basketball that Troy and we didn't have a chance to talk about a dominant team in the Big Ten a year ago. But I'll get into the top 25, the preseason poll, and then this week's poll. Basically nothing really changed for the Big Ten. But in general, very excited to do this show. This year is going to be a lot different than last year, I think. Again, like I mentioned, there were no serious threats to win the whole thing from the Big Ten a year ago. I liked Purdue from the start, and they were great, and they stayed in the top 25, I think, all year long. But in the end, Purdue was Purdue. They were never a serious threat to beat the North Carolinas, the Dukes, on a consistent basis. Eventually, Gonzaga got to the title game last year, which was cool to see. But Purdue finishes 27-8 a year ago. That's the Big Ten's best, most consistent team throughout last year. Number one team in the conference in terms of overall record, in terms of Big Ten record. They got to the Sweet 16, which 3 Big Ten teams did, but no Big Ten team even got to the Elite Eight a year ago. Purdue runs into Kansas, Wisconsin, upsets Villanova, and then loses to Florida in the next round. Michigan runs into Oregon in the Sweet 16. All those were Sweet 16 games. So eventually you run into a juggernaut, and if you're Wisconsin, you might beat one, but to beat another hot team in the Sweet 16, it was just hard for Big Ten teams to do that from a year ago. So this year we have a monster in Michigan State, who I think personally, and this is coming from a Duke fan, and also I have said before on this show, that I would prefer to have Tom Izzo coaching Duke than Mike Krzyzewski. And I don't know any other Duke fan that would say that, but I'm sure there are some out there. But I think Tom Izzo is probably the best coach in college basketball. Seriously. I don't know about recruiting. Obviously, Coach K does his thing. John Calipari does his thing. But in terms of just straight-up basketball, I think Tom Izzo is the best coach in the country.
You know what, though, youngster? How much recruiting does Coach K do?
No, I know.
It's the name.
I know it's not.
It's the name. You know what I'm saying? I had to interrupt you there because I've been, for those that are listening for the first time, and loyal listeners know that I coached college soccer, not the same as, big-time Big Ten basketball, but I recruited. And as a soccer coach, I was out there recruiting. But even when I go to tournaments, and you go to all of these tournaments, and there are D1 schools there, little different in soccer, but even some of the D1 soccer programs, Kevin, didn't send the head guy. They've got recruiting guys that go out there and evaluate. Coach K may make a phone call for a 5-star or a 4-star or a guy that really fits the program, but I don't think he does a whole lot of recruiting, nor does Tom Izzo. Now I don't, the say and all of the decision-making, even me, Kevin, though I sent my assistant out many times, and they come back and they report and say, hey, I found this kid. I want you to take a look at the film. And back when I coached, a little bit different. We didn't have all the YouTube stuff and all the stuff we have today. A lot of times the head coach isn't even out there recruiting. The head coach is going to have the final say and agree to a scholarship offer. But I'll tell you what, I don't know how much recruiting Izzo and Coach K do, But I'm going to tell you what, Tom Izzo, certainly his guys, his staff, they did it right for this year. They've got some depth on that team. They've got some talent on that team. You called them a monster. I'm going to call them a beast. I mean, how do you even look on paper anybody being close to them? That's what we're going to talk about on today's show. Michigan State is already 2 games in and probably one of the favorites to win the national championship should they stay healthy, Kevin. And I think he got so excited that he kept himself on mute.
It's very true. I got too excited there. But yeah, this Michigan State team, their sophomore class is what makes this team the beast, the juggernaut, the monster, whatever you want to call them. And then you add a top 10 recruit in Jaren Jackson, who's a 6'10" big, who is going to be in the NBA, I'm sure, next year. This team is loaded. You've got a sophomore in Cassius Winston at the point, Josh Langford, a sophomore at shooting guard, Miles Bridges, a sophomore at the 3. If you want to start Jaren Jackson, the freshman, the top 10 guy, at the 4. And then you got Nick Ward, the sophomore center, starting for you. So this team is young, but they have a lot of experience with that youth. And you're getting back Gavin Schilling, and I need to look up the other name. Gavin Schilling was a Michigan State guy from a year ago, a big who was going to be a senior. He got hurt before the year started. He never played. That helped Nick Ward develop a year ago inside, a name we mentioned constantly on last year's show for Michigan State, but also there was a transfer. I need to bring up his name, but he also was supposed to be a senior a year ago after transferring to Michigan State, a big, and he never got to play because he got hurt, just like Schilling did, on the inside. So now you've got Ward and Jackson, these 2 studs, leading you, along with Miles Bridges, if you want to call him a big. He absolutely can fit a college big, being 6'9" and how girthy he is. He's uber athletic for the size that he is, but he is a monster as well. He's like 6'9", 230, whatever it is. He's a big guy and obviously super talented. Any publication out there you want to read for Player of the Year, and he's right up there, if not the winner. Typically, he seems to be the winner this year for Player of the Year, according to the preseason poll or preseason publication.
Well, I just got to add this too, youngster, that Bridges, I think, surprised a lot of people by coming back to State. A lot of people thought he was going pro. So, and we applauded him back in the spring right after the tournament, and when he announced he was coming back to college, you and I on our Go Big main show actually applauded him for enjoying his youth and developing his game. And granted, too, you and I mentioned this. Part of that decision could have been last year's draft. As deep as it was, he's looking at it from a standpoint, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to go out. I'm going to improve my game. I probably would have been a lottery pick this year in 2017, but if I go back to school, play well, stay healthy, I could be one of the top picks in the NBA draft. And, that went through his mind, but I applaud this kid, Kevin, for coming back to Michigan State, and maybe he truly does care about winning a national championship. I don't think that's the ultimate motivation. I think a lot of it has to do with draft stock, where he's picked. He just, but I applaud the kid for coming back to college.
Yeah, no question about it. And he's what really makes this team, the number 2 team preseason in the country, and I think the best team in college basketball. If he wasn't here, I'd probably take Duke over Michigan State, but I think Michigan State will slightly edge out Duke because Duke is truly a bunch of just extremely talented freshmen. Michigan State is a bunch of extremely talented sophomores. And then you add Jaren Jackson, the top 10 power forward, to this group as a freshman. And, it's just you've got youthful experience, so to say, because all these sophomores a year ago played a ton of minutes, if not started. Bridges did, Ward did, Langford did, Winston did. I mean, all 4 of those sophomores started a year ago. That's how young this Michigan State team was. So people wanted to say it was a down year, but they were just super young, and they had probably the best freshman class that Tom Izzo ever brought in a year ago. And now you're really going to see the impact that class will have this year for Michigan State. But going forward, also I wanted to mention the name, finally, Ben Carter. He transferred he was actually started his college career at Oregon, transferred to UNLV, kind of killed it at UNLV, and then transferred to Michigan State. sat out last year because of the injury. Him and Schilling are two bigs that we didn't see a year ago on Michigan State. They were there. They just were injured, so they didn't play. Both of them took medical red shirts. Now they're behind Ward and Bridges and Jackson. So the front line is huge. When you've got guards like Josh Langford at the 2, Cassius Winston, who I love as a point guard, you've got and Matt McQuaid coming off the bench, Lou Rawls Nairn, any possible amount of nicknames you can come up with for him. He's also a backup, basically point guard, can also play the 2. This team is deep on the inside. They're deep on the perimeter. You've got very quality starters on the inside and the outside. That's why I think this team's the best team in the country. Again, this is coming from a Duke fan, and I'm critical on my favorite teams, but I'm not stupid about it. I think Duke's the second best team in the country. They're just a bunch of freshmen, and this team, Michigan State, is a bunch of sophomores. Finally, I'll actually move on to the preseason poll.
Yeah, I want to throw something else out here, though, Kevin. We might as well we'll do the preseason poll. Again, that's what I love about this show. This is our show. It can go off the cuff. Wanted to throw something out about Michigan State, which you brought up right here at the end. You talk about Duke and a bunch of talented freshmen. Great. They got to learn how to play together. Michigan State, these kids have already played together. And they struggled, and they had a tough schedule last year. You and I talked about it when we started the show in January. Everybody's like, what's wrong with Michigan State? What's wrong with Tom Izzo? Look at the schedule that they played and these young kids. Izzo was doing what Coach K has to do this year with a bunch of freshmen. And now, again, you got player after player that's been on the court. Like you said, Schilling, not even playing, getting that guy back and adding him to the mix. I mean, the cupcake games for them, that's going to help because he'll get in the mix of things. But these guys have already played together, Kevin. That's why I think, hands down, they're the best team in the country. They're young, and they've already played together, and they've played in some adversity because they certainly didn't get off to a great start. They didn't have a great conference record last year either. They've been there, and I guess, the word that people use, they're tested. They've been there. They've done that. They've went through adversity. They've lost some tough games. They've played some tough games. That's why, to me, that makes them the best team in the country. They've already been there. They've already done that. Now they can go out and play. They've already got a year under their belt. So I'll let you continue with the preseason poll, and you know how much I love them.
Oh, yeah. We have, like you listeners have listened to already, we do a football show. Obviously, we did basketball last year when this show actually came about. But football preseason poll has meant not too much, especially when you have the AP deciding the preseason poll, and then you've got the College Football Playoff Committee now doing the polls since 8-9 weeks in. The AP poll just truly becomes irrelevant. But this AP Top 25, as well. Take the AP poll that we show, that we display, I don't know how to say it, that we tell you guys week in, week out, and you can obviously look it up. It's not too difficult to find the Top 25 poll each week that comes out on Mondays, which is when we record this show. For those listening in, this is November 13th. So depending on when you're listening, obviously some things will be quote-unquote out of date or sound a little weird because Michigan State may have played Duke already, depending on when you're listening to this. But in general, especially basketball too, the AP poll means nothing because you have a bunch of committee members at the end of the year that is not associated with the AP determining which seeds these teams end up getting, which teams end up getting in the field, which we'll obviously talk about down the road once that matters in March. But in short, this AP poll, take it with a grain of salt, but at the same time, there are obvious reasons why some of these teams are ranked near the top. Duke is really good. Michigan State is really good. Arizona is really good. Kansas is really good. That shouldn't surprise people. Those are the top 4 teams according to the AP. But these teams almost outside of the top, you could argue 7, who knows potentially what these teams are going to be. I think the top 7 are going to be very strong just looking at this poll. I don't know enough about Florida at 8. North Carolina lost some guys a year ago at 9. So anything can happen. Even these top 7 teams, you have one injury, and that can impact everything. So anyway, again, Duke number 1, Michigan State 2, Arizona 3, Kansas 4. I mentioned the top 7 being pretty strong. Villanova at 5. You lose some guys, but I do like Villanova again this year. They also bring a lot of guys back. Brunson, the point guard, I love him. Wichita State at 6. That really is an eye-opener to me. They also have a really good point guard. He was a freshman a year ago, and he's a sophomore now. He's probably going to be an NBA player eventually. I don't know if he'll be out into the NBA world next year or not, but Wichita State is a very good team, and obviously sitting there at number 6. The AP thinks so as well. Kentucky at number 7. Not much to say there. You've got a bunch of talented freshmen. Florida 8, North Carolina 9, USC at 10. A lot of people probably raises the eyebrows there to see USC at 10, but they were pretty damn good a year ago. They were pretty good a year ago, and then toward the end of the season, they started to get pretty damn good. And now, coming into this year, you're bringing basically everyone back. You've got a really good coach at USC. This team's actually fairly dangerous. I don't think they're going to beat the Dukes and Michigan States, Arizonas, Kansases of the world come, March Madness. But if they ended up getting a 3 seed, like they would be projected right now to be, that wouldn't shock me at all. Outside of that, I'm not going to finish the top 25, but I did want to mention the Big Ten. Of course, Michigan State at 2, Minnesota at 15. That's the number 2 Big Ten team according to the AP. Northwestern started at 19 according to the preseason poll. Purdue was 20. That's it for the Big Ten. You've got 4 in there. You've got 3 very solid teams: Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue, which I would agree with, and then obviously Michigan State, the juggernaut, at number 2. But Week 2's poll has come out earlier today as we're recording this. Michigan State is still at 2. Minnesota moved up 1, I think because West Virginia was ahead of them, and they lost. So Minnesota moved up to 14. Northwestern and Purdue actually swapped. So Northwestern's 20, Purdue's 19. In the end, it doesn't mean anything, but just kind of weird, odd, funny, however you want to look at it. Purdue and Northwestern swap spots from the preseason poll to Week 2. And again, no one else after Purdue. But 3 teams also wanted to mention others receiving votes: Wisconsin, Maryland, and Michigan, right there.
You mean Wisconsin didn't make the top 25 by beating South Carolina State and Yale? Come on now.
No, unfortunately. Unfortunately not.
Those are quality wins right off the bat.
Yeah. They were fairly far down the line. They were somewhere in the low 30s, I guess, if we were to extrapolate the poll out according to how many votes they got. But Wisconsin, Maryland, Michigan, if any of those teams made the top 25, and there are others that we will bring up in the show throughout the year and end up getting, that 5, 6, 7 seed potentially, I think that's very possible for a lot of Big Ten teams this year. I think you've got 7 quality teams I just mentioned just in the AP poll and receiving votes: Michigan State, Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue, and then you got Wisconsin, Maryland, Michigan on the fringe. Those teams are very good. I don't have any other thoughts to say. Obviously, I'll go a little more in depth on each of these teams as the show goes on, but I have nothing to really talk about with these rankings because it's very early and it's the AP poll, so it doesn't matter. And there's nothing egregious that really, really wants to get me talking about the AP poll this early on.
Well, I'll tell you, me, I'm going to probably talk for about an hour about the AP poll because it's very important to me, youngster. Very important to me, this poll. No, I'm being very sarcastic for those listening in. Those that know me, I don't put a lot of stock in any of these, and I'll call it a preseason poll until conference play starts, Kevin. Now, I know you have like the Big Ten ACC Challenge, and those are great games. I'll watch a number 9 seed from the ACC against the number 9 team from the Big Ten. I just love that. I love that challenge, and I love the conference challenges. But outside of that, you dabble that in, and even some of these tournaments that people play in, these little 4-team tournaments, some teams have good competition. Other teams, however, Kevin, again, it's Cupcake City with extra frosting and extra sprinkles. I made fun. I jabbed at it. South Carolina State and Yale for Wisconsin after 2 wins. It didn't move them up in the poll. No, it's not going to move them up in the poll. They should have won. Now they're going to play Xavier on Thursday. They beat Xavier. You'll probably see them in the top 25, depending on what else they do over the weekend. But that would be a quality win. So this is not, to me, at least the basketball poll, to me, Kevin, is not as cupcake as football. Because in football, you got to go right to the conference. Not a lot of early season big games. But, again, to me, the rankings don't even matter throughout the year to me. What matters to me is, where are you in the conference? Are you falling in that top half of your conference? Are you going to be in the top echelon of your conference? I don't care if you're ranked first in the country. If you're playing poorly but continue to win, so be it. So I don't even put a lot of stock in. We'll talk about it every week. But, honestly, when it comes to my comments on the AP poll, it's going to be the same comment every week. Who cares? I don't care. I'm a Badger fan. People will know that. I don't care that they're receiving votes right now. What I'm worried about this year is to see if they're actually going to make the tournament. This is a totally different Badger team that I've seen in years. We'll talk about it later. They've got some talented guys there, but, man, they're young this year, Kevin. They've lost a lot of leadership. Some big names are gone from Wisconsin. I read a little tidbit. I'll throw this out there before we get into Wisconsin. And probably not a lot of people know this. I didn't know it until I read about it. Wisconsin over the past decade, Kevin, has not finished worse than fourth in the Big Ten. Fourth place for the last 10 years. That is hard to do. I don't think they're doing it this year. I think this conference, you said it, 7 teams deep probably for the tournament. Maybe 8. They could go to 8. Depends on a lot of things. But we're going to get into it. Michigan State, a class of their own. There's nobody even on their level. But then you probably have 6 or 7 teams that are going to be jockeying for position in there 2 through 7, 2 through 8 to see who else can represent the Big Ten. So to me, I'm going to watch Michigan State, but I'm expecting them to kind of cruise through the season. So I want to start off our preview this way, Kevin, is Michigan State going undefeated in Big Ten play. They very well could. It's tough to do, though. It's tough to go on the road. But I'm going to tell you what, they are in a class of their own. Like you said, I'm calling them a beast. They're dominant. They could make a legitimate run going undefeated in the Big Ten. And I'm saying that very seriously. Not just because of everything else we talked about. It's hard to go on the road and win. But, man, where's the weakness in Michigan State? I don't see one. So my question to you, and then we'll start the preview, can Michigan State go undefeated in Big Ten play?
I would say, can they? Yeah. Will they? I doubt it. It's so tough in college basketball, and just even in Big Ten play, you've got 18 regular season games in the Big Ten. You've got, and I don't have Michigan State's schedule up, I guess, directly in front of me yet. But regardless, I guess I do have it. But in short, I mean, you get Wisconsin twice. Just giving a very quick look. I guess they only play Purdue, Minnesota, Northwestern once each. But Maryland twice. At Maryland's not going to be easy. At Indiana's always hostile. There are a lot of quality teams in the Big Ten, but I will say this, that I think you hit it right on the head. You've got 7 Big Ten teams this year that I think are almost shoo-ins for the NCAA tournament. I can't, I guess, call Wisconsin a shoo-in.
I want to do it, youngster, and the reason, again, it's not – I love how you always put it, that we're very serious and critical and upfront about our teams. I am a huge Badger fan. But I look at the team this year. Where's the leadership coming from? They're so young. There's no Showalters anymore. There's no Nigel Hayeses anymore. Where's the leadership? You've got guys that have played some minutes, but not important minutes. You look at that team last year with senior laden, Kevin. That's why they made the deep run. Well, I guess not a deep run, but deeper than I thought in the NCAA tournament to the Sweet 16 because they had experience. They have no experience this year. Could they surprise teams? Could they finish 4th? Sure, they could. I really think those teams after Michigan State that we're talking about, you can throw them all in a hat, pick the what's the word I'm looking for? The sequence, how they end up at the end of the year. You could do it 10 times and have 10 different ways that those other 6, 7 teams fall into place in the conference. Because you talk about a tier system that you're going to talk about in a little bit, but these teams, you may have 1 or 2 that'll be second and third, and then you've got the other 4 that are going to fall in 4 through 7 or 8. So there's right now, could Wisconsin jump up and be in that top 4? They could. I just don't. So early in the season, I don't know where the experience is coming from, and it could cost them in some games against the Purdues, against the Northwesterns. So until they prove it to me, I've got to be very leery of my expectations of the Wisconsin Badgers this year.
Yeah, for sure. Here's, I guess, my little I guess I'll piggyback off what you said, that 7 teams, maybe you don't shoe in Wisconsin, maybe you don't shoe in Maryland, but I think both teams make it. Then outside of that, I'll get into those teams a little later, but I think Iowa will push for an NCAA tournament spot. And then I don't want to give away kind of one of the teams that I'm really looking forward to seeing, who I think is probably the 9th best team in the Big Ten, but we'll get there.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Because
okay.
I need to tell fans right now, you're keeping something in the bag, and there's one team that I think people are overlooking this year also. And
okay.
I'll tell you what, if it's the same team, Kevin, I may just have to pull my car over and just honk the horn continuously if we pick the same team, because for the fans listening in, Kevin and I did not compare notes. We did a little pre-production before about what we're going to talk about, but we didn't say, hey, who do you think is going to win? Well, Michigan State. But we didn't rank the teams and compare notes. So what we're talking about is totally what we have researched on our own, what we think. We have not went into cahoots to say, yeah, I agree with you. No, I disagree with you. To do anything fake. We have not compared any notes, and I'll be surprised, Kevin. I'm telling you, if it's the same team that I'm going to mention, I'll be amazed. So I had to say that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Anyway, my one team. So yeah, I think Big Ten in general, you've got 14 teams. I don't think the Big Ten. Maybe it is the best conference in college basketball this year. I don't know. I haven't done extensive research on the other conferences yet, but just for the Big Ten, which I have put all my focus on at this point, outside of Duke. Obviously, I'm a Duke fan, like I mentioned before. But in general, I know that 7 teams will probably get in from the Big Ten, but this isn't some overarching dominant conference that's going to have 10 bids come from the Big Ten. That's not happening this year unless a lot of things fall into place perfectly for some of those teams toward the bottom. I think 7 is a very strong possibility. I think 8 is certainly a possibility. To say that more than 8 from the Big Ten would go into the NCAA tournament, I think you should be getting a lot of money if you're putting money on 9 or more Big Ten teams getting into the tournament. You'd have to have a little side bet for that. I don't know if there's any Vegas bets for over-unders on conference teams making the NCAA tournament at this point in the year. But regardless, I'll get into my little tier system with not many notes to it whatsoever. And Troy, you kind of brought it up that Michigan State's in its own tier, and I had the same exact thing. To me, Minnesota and Purdue are in that next tier. There is no other team with Michigan State, in my opinion. It's not even like last year that I thought Purdue was the best team and no other team sniffed them. It's a much bigger drop-off this year. I think Minnesota is pretty good. I think they can be dangerous. I think Purdue can be dangerous, even without Swanigan, because they bring back basically everyone except Swanigan. So I think they can be pretty damn good. If they made a Final Four, it wouldn't shock me. I don't expect it to happen, but it wouldn't shock me. They're still not of the class of, your Kansases, Villanovas, Dukes, Kentucky's, Michigan States. But if they pulled an upset in the Elite Eight, wouldn't shock me whatsoever. Same thing with Minnesota. You're bringing back basically everyone from a year ago, and that team was pretty damn dangerous toward the stretch. Minnesota a year ago, let me check as to what they did. Oh, they got upset by Middle Tennessee State, who basically everyone loved. And they also were 6 deep going in the tournament because they had an injury right before it. That sucked because I loved Minnesota down the stretch. We talked about it in last year's show.
We were pretty high on Minnesota, actually, until the injuries happened.
Yep.
You go back, those that listened to the show last year, near the end of that Big Ten season, we were talking about the Gophers and that they might have been one of the teams that was playing the best basketball, and then just the injury bug hit. And then, like you said, 6 deep in the tournament, didn't expect much. I did pick the upset in my bracket for them to go down, but it wasn't because they weren't a good team. It was just because they had to go through the grueling Big Ten tournament shorthanded, and then they went into this tournament, and like you said, 6 deep. You can't win in the NCAA tournament 6 deep. You just can't. You got to go deeper than that. But Minnesota, this is a team. They're not a dark horse team, Kevin. I expect them to be near the top, along with Purdue. I'm just going to throw my notes in here as you continue. I don't need to go into long-winded analysis of each of these teams. Purdue, like you said, Swanigan gone. But other than that, they return everybody. And the thing with Purdue, they can sit outside and just keep stroking it out there. And if that outside shot is going down, they're tough to beat. And they're going to be gritty. They're going to get the boards. They're going to extend possessions. They're going to limit other teams to one possession and done. I like this Purdue team again. Again, everybody we talk about is not at the level of Michigan State, but at that next level, battling up for 2, 3, 4, I have to put Purdue there. I have to put Minnesota there because Minnesota is going to be fun to watch, a healthy Minnesota team. And they could be near the top of the Big Ten all year as we go through this show, Kevin.
Yeah. Top tier for me, Michigan State. Second tier to me, Minnesota and Purdue. The AP puts Northwestern with Purdue, basically, and not very short behind Minnesota. I think Northwestern's kind of in a tier of its own. Like you said, though, Troy, 2 through 7 in the Big Ten. Minnesota and Purdue could have a little bit of a down year than what we think, and Wisconsin and Maryland could surprise some people, in my opinion, and shoot up there. I don't think that's impossible to say that would happen. But for me, just going into the year, Michigan State's in a realm of its own, and then Minnesota, Purdue, 2 and 3. Either way, swap one team for the other.
Well, like I said, Kevin, for Purdue, if they're not shooting well from the outside, and they're playing against other teams that rebound well, box out well, could give Purdue fits, and could be an extra 2 or 3 losses, and an extra 2 or 3 losses in the Big Ten will drop you from 2 or 3 down to 5 or 6. So there is some things with Purdue that could limit them and make them the 5th best team in the conference. Should they have, go on a streak, a 1 week or a 2 week streak, because you're playing 2 games in a week where they're not shooting well and they drop 3 games. It could happen. We've seen it happen before. So I still like Purdue, though, because they got experience and they shoot well from the outside. It's not like they're horrid from the outside, but there could be a couple games where they're not hitting from the outside, and boom, they get upset by, a Iowa or a Penn State, or even, I guess I'll say even upset by a Wisconsin. Because, again, I just don't know where the experience is on Wisconsin. So I wanted to throw that in there also.
Yeah. It's funny you brought up, how much a couple losses can impact you, because I have last year's Big Ten standings. And number 2 was Wisconsin. They finished 12-6 in the Big Ten. Number 8 was Iowa. They were 10-8. The 2-game difference between 2 and 8. I don't know if that's going to be the same thing this year, having a 2-game difference separate 2 through 8. But my God, 2 extra losses here and there, a buzzer beater, an overtime game. Iowa could have been 12-6, could have been the number 2 team in the Big Ten tournament going into it. Instead, you lose a couple extra games, you're down to number 8. That's a huge drop. If you're considered the second best Big Ten team or the 8th, that's a huge difference. But regardless, number 4 for me, Northwestern, kind of a tier of its own. I think they're going to be very, very solid. They bring back almost everyone from a year ago, a team that pushed Gonzaga and Gonzaga made the title game a year ago. So I think Northwestern's very solid. If they finished at number 2 in the Big Ten, would not surprise me. I just think they're a little bit below Minnesota, Purdue talent-wise, but the difference is not much. For me, number 5 is Michigan. I think they can be very interesting. You lose guys like Derek Walton Jr., the point guard, and that's going to hurt, obviously. Michigan, we fell in love with Michigan toward the end of the Big Ten year, as did the country, because of plane troubles and jersey troubles, and they ended up playing in the Big Ten tournament hot. So everyone fell in love with Michigan, and Michigan did well, obviously, toward the stretch. Losing in the Sweet 16, it took Oregon, a team with a ridiculous offense, to beat them. And I know you, Troy, I think, did you have Michigan in the Final Four, or was that Purdue, or did you have Michigan in the Elite Eight?
I had Michigan in the Elite Eight. I don't believe I had them in the Final Four, but I had Michigan in the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
And that's because they were playing so well. And you look at it, and, yeah, people fell in love with them because of the plane, because of the jerseys. But we talked about it, and, again, we talked about it on the show, how hot they were in that Big Ten tournament. And they, you look, and you'd have to go back to last year's show, but we looked at the two sides of the bracket, and Michigan, if they were on the other side, they would have been in the championship game. They had tough games in the Big Ten tournament, and I think that prepared them for that little mini run that they had, because if you would have said at the beginning of the year, would Michigan have done what they did, I don't think a lot of people would have expected that. And they got really hot at the end of the year. That was a good little team, and they're still going to be pretty decent this year.
Yeah, I think they'll be in the tournament for sure. It's going to take a collapse, in my opinion, for them not to make the NCAA tournament. They're number 5 to me. Then I think 6 and 7 you can swap out. I think I'm higher than you, Troy. Maryland and Wisconsin on a tier of its own at 6 and 7. I think they'll both be interesting. I think that Ethan Happ will not necessarily carry this team in scoring, but he's gotten double and triple teamed. I haven't seen any Wisconsin game of the regular season yet. I think they're.
Does it matter?
Right.
I mean, seriously, does it matter, Kevin? And I'm not being a smartass about it. Excuse my language, but it's a podcast, not radio. I'm not being a smarty about it, but does it matter right now? He can go out there and score 35, 40 points a game. It's not going to matter until he plays somebody good. And I'm going to right now, I know you put 6 and 7, Maryland. You said you can swap them. I'm actually probably a little higher on Maryland than you are, Kevin, and here's why. I know they lost Trumbull, but I look at the makeup of these two teams very similar, right? Young teams, but you look at the guys on Maryland, the young guys, they played a lot more than the guys from Wisconsin. I actually think Maryland can slide up into maybe the 4th best team in the Big Ten, but again, you're talking about minuscule buzzer beaters, overtime games where Maryland could be 4 or 8. But I do like Maryland. I like Maryland for the fact that these young guys got to play last year, and so they have that experience factor. And you mentioned it before when I asked you the question about can Michigan State go undefeated. You said yes, but probably not, because you're going on the road. Even going on the road to Iowa, Penn State, Northwestern, and I'll tell you, being a Badger fan, going to the Kohl Center, that's not an easy place to play. Going to Maryland, heck, I know Rutgers is at the bottom, but even sometimes last year they played pretty decent at home for a little bit. Going on the road in any conference and in any sport is tough. You have travel, you're out of your natural routine, so going on the road is tough. But these kids from Maryland, the freshmen especially, and the young guys, they've been there, they've done that, they've had to step on the court and play in these other environments where, again, I looked and I flipped the page to Wisconsin, the young guys didn't play much. They sat behind the seniors last year, and for the last couple of years, and Happ's the only guy that has extensive minutes. I know Trice played a bit, but what do you got, 2 guys? 2 guys going to carry your team? Not going to happen. That's why I like Maryland, though, Kevin. I like the experience that these youth have. So I'm a little bit higher on Maryland than you are in this poll. I like them. If I was ranking them right now, I'd actually have Maryland up at 4. So that's where I think they would fall in for me in the preseason, just because I like the young guys. I like the experience that they have, and I like their skill set. And here's my thing. I think they're a better team without Trimble. People think I'm nuts. He's a scorer. He's this, he's that. I think they depended on him too much. I think without him there, you're going to ask other guys to step up, and I think that makes Maryland a better team. I'm not saying a more dangerous team, because Trimble, in a college game, his college experience, and a college player, awesome guy that could change a game. But I think they depended on just him. Now he's not there. Who's going to step up? And I think these guys can step up to the challenge because they've been there. They got experience. And now maybe you're going to see a true Maryland team. You're not going to see Maryland Trembles. You're going to see the Maryland Terps. And that's why I think I like them a little bit higher in the conference this year to start the season anyway. I got them around number 4, Kevin.
Yeah, understandable. I'm 100% in agreement with you that I think they are better. I think they are more dangerous without Trimble, because Trimble was the ball handler. He ran the offense, and the offense was not very existent a year ago for Maryland. I thought he stopped the offense when he had it, and he had it more than anyone else. So, yeah, he's a good player, probably an A- college basketball player, but these other guys that maybe are B-pluses, and a couple of them are projected to go to the NBA eventually, and these next 3 from a year ago that are now the 3 leaders of this year's team, I start being able to distribute the ball and get in the flow of an offense. And Kevin Huerter, who to me is absolutely going to be in the NBA as a 2-guard, he, I think, shot over 40% from 3 a year ago. He's going to do so again. And I think Maryland is a dangerous team on any given night. It could beat a team like Michigan State because of the way they can shoot the ball and because of the free-flowing offense that they will have. So, yeah, Michigan State playing Maryland twice, not going to be easy. I have Michigan above Maryland, but I could very easily swap that. These tiers from 2 through 7, not a huge difference. But I am on, I guess, the lower side of Wisconsin. I would say Maryland's probably a little better, but I think it wouldn't surprise me to see Wisconsin crack the top 6, so to say. But in general, I think Wisconsin, again, I'm not going to get huge into notes here right now, and I have small notes on these teams that I want to get to later on, but nothing extensive. But Wisconsin in general is just Wisconsin, and I think that despite not having senior leaders and having Hap, like I was going to say, that he's drawn double teams, triple teams in every exhibition game, and I think that's going to hold true in the Big Ten play because everyone knows that Hap is Wisconsin's best player. So he's going to get doubled. He's going to get tripled. And being able to find and pass the ball out of the post into wide open guys and cutters into the lane, I think Wisconsin is going to be dangerous because, one, they are Wisconsin. They're a smart team every single year, no matter who's on that team. They're smart. And being able to play from the inside, having an All-American on the inside and dishing it out to the outside, I think you've got some capable young guys on this team. Kobe King is a freshman who could lead the team in scoring this year. Honestly, he did so a couple times in exhibition play, which is exhibition play, but I think he very easily could score more points than Ethan Happ this year because of Ethan Happ drawing everyone's attention in the world that plays Wisconsin. So I think there's going to be a little dangerous factor in Wisconsin, and again, they are Wisconsin. I don't expect this huge drop-off from a year ago. It's just going to look very different because you had all those seniors a year ago, and now Happ's kind of the leader as a sophomore. So things will look different, but I think they'll be just about as efficient as they were a year ago. And depending how these young guys develop, maybe even more dangerous if you have to worry about the 3-ball and Happ on the inside. I don't know. Maybe none of it comes to fruition and you don't have to respect anyone except Happ, and it becomes a cluster in the post, and maybe it is problematic for Wisconsin to even make the tournament. I just think Wisconsin figures it out at the end of the day.
Well, the one thing, Kevin, is they're going to play good defense. And at the end of the day, Wisconsin is going to live and die by how well they're shooting it from the perimeter. If they can feed it into Happ all they want, but if Happ dishes it back out and they're not hitting those shots from the outside, it means nothing.
Right.
I mean, that's what will happen then is it'll draw. So, for example, and I know people listening to the show, basketball savvy. So if Happ is being double-teamed and every time he's double-teamed, he's knocking it out to Trice, and Trice is knocking down outside shots, well, they're going to have to extend the defense. But if they're not hitting those outside shots, well, they're not going to respect it. Now they can even drop another guy down into Happ, and it could be a long, long day. And I follow the Badgers a lot and very, very in-depth. And, Kevin, this has been something, if they're not hitting from the outside, even last year and the year before, even when they made their great runs to the Final Four, they need to make outside shots because they had post play with Kaminsky. But even with Kaminsky, you can't – if you're not hitting from the outside, now you're going to double him. So somebody from the outside, and that was the thing, though, the Wisconsin teams of the past were very efficient from the outside, and they worked that shot clock down, wear the defense out, and they take good quality shots. And I don't expect that to change at all. Just the names have changed. It's just that they're young and inexperienced to me, Kevin, and I got to see how they do it on the big stage. Big Ten basketball is a big stage. You mentioned you don't know if they're the best conference in America. I don't know if they're the best, but I'm going to tell you what, they're competitive all the way up to number 10 in this league. I mean, there are teams I wouldn't be surprised if you see I still can't do it, Rutgers fans. I'm sorry. Not that Rutgers can go out and win on any given night, but there's teams at the bottom of this conference, Kevin, that can pull upsets if you're not playing your A game. That's why I think I'm not going to say the Big Ten is the best, but I'm going to say it's going to probably be one of the most competitive conferences in America this year.
Yeah, outside of that top spot. But yeah, 1 or 2 through 9 can push Michigan State on any given day. I believe that wholeheartedly. And Michigan State is the best team in the country, in my opinion. So that goes to show how good the middle of the Big Ten is, in my opinion. That's why I think you can see 9 teams, but you're pushing it. I think at that point to get to the NCAA tournament, a lot of chips have to fall correctly for 9 of your 14 teams to make it. But moving on from the top 7, in my opinion, 8 and 9 of the same tier, and Iowa is one of those teams, and I'm very excited to get to number 9, and hopefully it's the same team, Troy. I'd be surprised if it is. Like you said, we don't compare notes. We don't fake things on this show. Occasionally we'll compare notes before shows, but for this show in particular, we did not. We did our own homework on these teams, and
I don't even think we compare notes. We just talk. We just talk.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, we're going to bring this up on the show. We don't get all in depth. Like, here's my analysis of this. But we didn't do that at all for this show. You know, as you noticed, I was pretty mute in the pre-production show. I didn't ask you who I thought. I didn't even ask you what your rankings were. We just had a conversation. So we got to throw that out there because we're getting close to this team that we think might make us some noise near the bottom of the conference.
Yeah, Iowa at number 8 for me, of the same tier as the number 9 team, and you mentioned them a couple times so far in the show, Troy. Hopefully that's a little preview for who I have, but I have Iowa at 8, and also kind of 8/9 with Iowa is Penn State for me.
Is Penn State your team, Kevin?
Penn State's my team.
Oh, my gosh. I got to find a place to pull over and start honking the horn. There, I just honked the horn. I just honked the horn.
I heard
a lot of media has Penn State near this 8, 9, 10, even 11, and a lot of media people don't even have them in the tournament. They're like, oh, they're going to have to wait. They're going to have to wait. That's a bunch of BS. I think if the chips fall right, this young Penn State team that has a lot of very good players and a tenacious defense can make the tournament this year. They could, if things go right. They have to have some upsets. They're going to have to beat an Iowa. They're going to have to, beat the Maryland 1 or 2 times. I think they can sneak into the tournament. I love this Penn State team. I literally am on their bandwagon. I want to see them do well, except that I hope they don't beat Wisconsin. I just don't want them to beat Wisconsin. But I think Penn State, I keep looking at all the media stuff. Oh, they're 8, they're 9, and that's where we have them. I actually, though, Kevin, I didn't want to let it out of the bag, and I was kind of thinking in my head, Kevin's got them down there. I actually have Penn State as the 7th team in the Big Ten. I actually have them even with Wisconsin right now, just because they got some young talent there, and I like this team.
Yeah, it's funny. Again, we don't compare notes even when we supposedly do give more, I guess, of our show away, so to say, in the pre-production meeting, but we never have pre-production meetings that are longer than probably 5 minutes talking about the actual content of the show. We just kind of say, hey, realistically, here was our pre-production show. It was basically, I texted you, Troy, earlier in the day about what I wanted to talk about. And it was just kind of overarching Big Ten stuff. Talk a little bit about last year, how those teams finished, talk about the preseason poll, because that's just what you do at this time of the year. And then for me, I've got my little tier system, and that's what I texted you. Other than that, I mean, we didn't talk about anything. Realistically, we didn't even talk about that in depth whatsoever. It was just, hey, here's the topics I want to cover. And that's what we've been doing to this point. That's what we will do going forward. The show doesn't have we're not going to keep listeners for a ton of time longer than this. But there is a few things I wanted to mention as well. But in this tier system, I have Iowa 8, Penn State 8, 8/9. You have them even higher, Troy. I find it funny to have a team like Penn State like that for both of us creeping into the NCAA tournament potentially. And with you, I like this team. I'll follow them all year more than your average number 9 team in the Big Ten that could potentially finish there, in my opinion. But your top 2 players, and I've got little notes on each of these teams.
I like Shep Gardner. I like Shep, and I like Carr. I mean, these guys, and they play. If you watch them play last year, I think they were 8-10 in the Big Ten last year. And very easily, they brought teams down to the final 2 minutes. And that experience, the games they lost last year in those final 2-3 minutes, Kevin, invaluable experience for this year. Will they find a way to pull it out this year? I don't know. But what a great experience. I know you never want to lose games, but this team's so young. And I believe the freshmen they brought in, and again, for some of those people listening in, I do this show when I'm driving, and so I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it's Wheeler, the guy they brought in. There's a lot of people really high on this Wheeler kid, Kevin. He's supposed to see some extended minutes. This is a kid that could even add to what's already there. And another young team. My only concern with Penn State is that they are still young. They are a young team. So did they learn last year from those late losses? We won't know until they can prove it. This is kind of that prove-it team to me, and that's why I said if things fall into place, this could be a team that you see in that 7-8 right on the bubble to get into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, for sure. And Wheeler is the guy that you're mentioning. Here's my little notes on Penn State. You've got your 2 top players, scorers, in my opinion, from a year ago back. They're now sophomores. So like Troy has said, this is a young team still. But you've got some sophomores in there. With Tony Carr, Lamar Stevens on the inside, both average, 13 points a game, 12 points a game. Then you've got a senior guard in Shep Gardner, who Troy mentioned, average 12 points a game. Those 3 are going to carry the load for this team. Shep, obviously, as a senior, a good basketball player, no question, and being a senior guard means a lot in college basketball.
I'm going to interrupt, Kevin, because he's one of those guys that we just talked about at the beginning of the show. Does he have the potential to play in the NBA? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if he'll be an NBA player. Is he a good college basketball player? Yes. Is he a good leader on Penn State's team? Yes. He is probably the definition of college basketball and what you see on the court. I love watching this kid play. Yeah, I'd agree wholeheartedly. He's a 6'2" guy. He's a 6'2" guard, kind of a combo guard, so he's not ideal in what you want size-wise because he's not a true point. Being a 6'2" point guard in the NBA is just fine, but if you're one of those combo guards that likes to be the 2 as well,
You obviously like those guys to be 6'5", 6'6", so not ideal size for the NBA. Like you said, in college and being a senior guard, with a bunch of talented sophomores and freshmen alongside, I'm earning the valuable experience that he did a year ago, like you mentioned, Troy. I like him. I like this backcourt, and I like Stevens on the inside. He proved it a year ago as a freshman that he can score 12 points a game. What can he do as a sophomore? A lot of this is projecting to what these freshmen do in the offseason. And if Carr and Stevens become much better players than what they were a year ago, and you have Garner as the senior point guard for you, that's going to be big. Mike Watkins, as a sophomore, is also back. 4 of the top 5 scorers from this team are back. You also have the Wheeler kid that Troy mentioned. This team is, I don't think, dangerous in terms of, NCAA tournament and making a deep run, but they're dangerous in the Big Ten in the fact that, again, I think 2 through 9 in this conference can beat Michigan State, who is, again, my opinion, the best team in the country, on any given night. If Penn State pulled off the upset, the world would go into, panic shock because it's Penn State beating this monster Michigan State in basketball. What just happened?
Now you're probably off in la land there, Kevin. I like Penn State. I don't think they're taking down Michigan State. I think
no.
I'll throw it out there since I had to make light of that. I see Penn State as that team that could be on the bubble at the end of the year, a team that's going to be right there, maybe get in as a 12 seed. But again, they're so young. They're not the only guy leaving, and it'll be a big loss in Gardner. But you look at the guys around him, and then you've got a team that another year hanging around that 7, 8, 9 spot. I guarantee when we do this show next year, and, hopefully we're still doing the show a year from now, maybe on a major network, hint, people listening in, that would be great. But you look at next year, 2018, and I know I'm already skipping past this year. This is a Penn State team that we're probably going to be talking about that will probably be up in the 4 or 5 range next year, Kevin.
Yeah, very possible. These young guys, I don't think, are going to the NBA, and that's kind of the beauty of having talented 3-star recruits and your occasional 4-star recruit is those guys they aren't one and done. They aren't prove it your freshman year, prove it your sophomore year, now we're gone type guys. They stick with you until their senior year. That's kind of the luxury that Michigan State has this year over teams like Duke and Kentucky, Kansas to an extent. But so Penn State, obviously a notch below Michigan State, a notch below teams like Minnesota, Purdue, Northwestern, who are just going to be very solid and could be very dangerous in the NCAA
Kevin,
tournament.
they're more than a notch. They're like on my belt. They're like Michigan State's the first notch, and Penn State's like the 6th notch on my belt.
Yeah.
But
fair enough.
I'm not knocking Penn State. I love them. I'm rooting. I'm putting it this way. I'm rooting for Penn State. I rooted for Northwestern last year to make the tournament because it had been never in their history. Penn State has been since, I believe, 2011 that they've made the NCAA tournament. I'm rooting for Penn State to make the tournament. And again, I'm just not going to root for them when they play Wisconsin. But I'm rooting for Penn State to get in the tournament. I think it's only great for the Big Ten to get teams like a Northwestern to return guys and make the tournament. And now a young, talented Penn State team. If they could make the tournament this year, that would be just awesome in my book.
Yeah, completely agree. Also, a year ago, they went 6-12 in Big Ten play. They were even worse. They finished 12th. So for this team to go from 12th, and again, Penn State basketball, to the NCAA tournament this year would be an awesome story. I'll move on for now. Number 10 and 11 for me on the same tier, Indiana and Ohio State. Indiana's straight up rebuilding. And we talked about, we gave a hint at the beginning of the show that they lost to Indiana State. And Indiana State is nothing to write home about. Last year they had a losing record. So for Archie Miller, the new coach, to go into his first year and lose his opening game to Indiana State, not exactly what you want to have happen. I'll give a quick recap of that after these little tiers. But in general, they're a rebuilding team, and Ohio State with them. Another new coach in Chris Holtman. From Butler, I think Ohio State has 3 seniors, and they have Holtman, who I believe in, but they didn't care last year, and that was for Thad Matta, who was a pretty damn good coach. So do all those 3 seniors buy into Holtman and this new system, and do they have enough time to learn this new system? And it's just going to be kind of a cluster in Ohio State this year. I'd be surprised if they made the NCAA tournament. But they do have 3 seniors who can play. They're not incapable talent-wise. They just showed absolutely nothing from a year ago. That was kind of the struggle with Ohio State. That's why Mata got fired. But Indiana, Ohio State, there for me at 10, 11, 12, 13, same for me. In a tier of their own, kind of Nebraska and Illinois. Nebraska's going to be fine. You know, a year ago, they would push teams to the brink. We mentioned that a few times a year ago, that Nebraska could have pulled off the upset if they hit, this 1-3, or if they didn't have a technical foul, and whatever else happens. Nebraska was close to beating a lot of teams last year. They just didn't. And this year, I don't think they're necessarily better because they lost their best player from a year ago. So Nebraska is Nebraska. And Illinois right there, new head coach, Brad Underwood, from Oklahoma State, number 1 scoring offense in college basketball a year ago. I think Illinois will be fine, and maybe they'll be a little interesting with Underwood, but this is just kind of a newish team as well. They're not extremely talented, but he's already starting to bring in huge recruits. I don't know if it's a 5-star for 2018, but he's like the top kid in Illinois for 2018. He's a very high 4-star at the worst. So he's going to get the ship running. It's just not going to be this year. And then at the bottom for me is Rutgers. You've got some upperclassmen on this team. Corey Sanders is kind of the leader. You've got a couple freshmen who could be interesting. But these guys are not making huge impacts game to game. They're on a different talent field than the top 11, in my opinion. And Nebraska, Illinois, I think, are more interesting than Rutgers at this point. That's kind of how I see the Big Ten. Michigan State in a tier of its own. Minnesota, Purdue could be very dangerous. Northwestern is going to be very solid. Michigan's going to be interesting. Maryland, Wisconsin, also going to be interesting. Newish teams in the sense of how they are going to attack you this year. Iowa, Penn State for me, fringe NCAA tournament teams. Indiana, Ohio State, Nebraska, Illinois, Rutgers. We'll see what happens with those teams. But the top 9, to me, very interesting. And I didn't talk at all about Iowa, really. But those top 9 are very interesting. And, again, I truly believe that Michigan State could lose to a Penn State. I don't think it happens. I think Michigan State could run the table. But I think Penn State is capable. I think an 11 seed to 12 seed is capable of beating a 1 seed. I don't think it's impossible. And that's what we're kind of talking about here with Iowa, Penn State, even Wisconsin. If Troy, thinks they might not even make the tournament, I think it's possible. Michigan State slips up somewhere, but they, for me, are on a tier of their own. For me, Troy, going forward, I've got very quick notes on what these teams are. And then other than that, we can get into not necessarily games from the first week of the season because they were terrible, but there are some interesting games from week 2. If you've got anything else you'd want to add on those.
Yep,
those tiers,
my bold prediction right here.
Yeah.
Mark it down. Rutgers will not finish 14th.
Okay.
They're not going to be on the bottom of the Big Ten.
All right.
I'm not saying they're going to finish any higher than 13, but I don't think Rutgers finishes last. And here's why. I'm not going to get into it. You mentioned coaching changes. You mentioned some of those teams at the bottom. There's so many other integral parts that are going on there, building programs, rebuilding programs, getting systems in place. Rutgers has returning players. Now, again, were they competitive last year? I got a hem and haw around that one. But they've got some guys coming back, and they've brought in some new guys, and I was reading about these guys, and there's some interesting stories there.
Yeah.
So I'm making this bold prediction. They're not making the tournament. They're probably not even making the NIT. But I'm going to tell you this. They're not going to finish 14th. They're going to finish 13th. Who finishes below them? I don't know. It could be Nebraska. It could be Illinois. I don't think it's Indiana, Kevin. I know that you're not very high on them, but I don't think it's going to be Indiana. I think Indiana will be up around 10 or 11, somewhere in that range. But it could be Illinois or Nebraska. Nebraska, oh jeepers! I looked at their roster, did some homework. Could be a long year down in the Cornhusker State for basketball. Football hasn't been blazing this year, and now you're going to add some horrid basketball to it. Oh, it could be a long. And I'm sorry, Nebraska fans, but I'm just stating the truth. Your football team is pooing the bed. Your basketball team, on paper, it doesn't look like they're going to get very far out of the bathroom door. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I'm going to run through my quick notes just so that they're out there. They will be very quick notes. If you want to interject, feel free. Outside of that, once I'm done with this, I'm down to get into games, which we're not going to break down in depth at all. We're an hour and 10 minutes into the show. We don't want to go too much longer. But my notes for some of these teams, again, with Michigan State, I'll start from the top and go down. For me, anyway. Michigan State, Cassius Winston, Josh Langford, Miles Bridges, Nick Ward, all sophomores, had a bunch of playing time a year ago. Now you add a top 10 recruit in Jaren Jackson, a 6'10 big who's going to be in the NBA. I think Ward makes the NBA. Bridges makes the NBA. I think this starting five will all be in the NBA at some point. I don't know when, but I think all five make it. And to have 5 NBA players, all with a bunch of experience outside of Jackson, and then you add guys like Nairn and McQuaid and Schilling and Carter off the bench. Those are 9 names that are going to make an impact. That's just 9 off the top of my head. I don't have all those names in front of me right this second. Those are just 9 off the top of my head.
Their second team, Kevin, could probably compete to be in that second tier that we were talking about. They could, if they took their second team and made Michigan State B. They could finish second, third, or fourth in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's not not a terribly long stretch there. This team's loaded from top to bottom. There is no weakness, and in college basketball, to have no weakness is very odd. I guess you could make the argument that their weakness is that you're leaning on all these sophomores and a freshman to start for you and be your top 5 players this year. You know, your senior leaders, so to say, are all coming off the bench. How does that dynamic work? I think Tom Izzo figures it out with the talent that this team has.
The weakness is they've got to get through their 30 game or their 26 or 27 game schedule before the tournament healthy. That's the only weakness that there is. The only weakness is they got to play 18 Big Ten games and be prepared. I mean, literally from top to bottom, Kevin. They just need to make sure they're playing their best basketball when the tournament starts, because we all know it only takes one game. It's not a series. It's not best of 3. It's not best of 5. It's one game. It's 40 minutes. And if you're not playing your best basketball at that time, I'm not saying that they would be a 1 seed that loses to a 16, but they could be that team, if they're not playing their best basketball, that could go down to an 8 seed. We've seen it happen. Wisconsin did it last year. Wisconsin had some good players, wasn't a great team, but they got lightning in a bottle for 40 minutes and took down Villanova. And if Michigan State's not playing their best basketball at tournament time, that's the only weakness I see on this team.
Yeah, and that goes for any team in the country, whether you're the number 1 overall team or not. In the NCAA tournament, once you get to the second round, especially, those you can run into an 8 seed in Wisconsin who's got some good players, not great, but maybe senior laden like Wisconsin, and you hit a few more threes than you usually do, and boom, you're done. If you play in a below average game, you're done. Lose by 1 point, boom, your season's over. So absolutely, that can happen to Michigan State. That can happen to any team. Once you get to the second round, you really have to play at least pretty good basketball. To play average basketball in the second round of the NCAA tournament, I don't care who you are, you've got a good shot at being beat. So, yeah, get through the season healthy. Tom Izzo will make sure that this team's humming going in the NCAA tournament one way or another, but be healthy. That's really, I mean, we're going to talk about Michigan State and Duke in a little bit. That's on Tuesday. November 14th. But in the end, that game, it's not as though they don't matter, because the committee looks at these matchups in November and say, hey, Duke beat Michigan State. Both these teams are fringe 1-2 seeds. We'll give Duke the 1 seed because they beat Michigan State. And Michigan State can be the 2. Maybe they're the number 2 out west instead of in the Midwest and the number 1 where they want to be. And it is a complete difference maker, potentially, in that second-round matchup, let's say, to have to travel to the West Coast and play a team maybe from the West Coast. Maybe you get a South Carolina if you're a Duke from a year ago. I'm going to mention that matchup a lot from a year ago because I'm a Duke fan. But Duke gets a number 2 seed instead of a number 1 seed. People say, what's really the difference there? Ultimately, number 1, number 2 seed, you're playing, an average team in the second round regardless. But Duke maybe doesn't get the number 1 advantage that they had. Instead they're a 2 seed. And instead you play a number 7 seed in South Carolina in the second round as opposed to an 8 or a 9. I don't know how they match up with that 8-9 seed potentially if they're in a different region. But instead you get South Carolina, who plays elite defense and has a bunch of seniors and performed poorly going in the NCAA tournament, but said, hey, we're in the NCAA tournament now. We're a bunch of seniors. We can play D. And you play against a bunch of young freshmen in Duke, and they pull the upset. So, yeah, being a 2 seed as opposed to a 1 seed can make all the difference in the world. You want to be playing well. And it's not as though those Michigan State and Duke games don't matter in November, but you ultimately just want to be healthy if you're a team like Michigan State going forward, because you have a legitimate shot at winning the whole thing. I will go down the road. Minnesota, number 15, now number 14 in the country. You return 4 out of 5 starters. Your top 4 scorers return, all averaging at least 10 points per game. This is a really fun team to watch. Mason as a guard, really good. Coffey, Murphy, Lynch, all really good. All return from a year ago. Again, those are your top 4 scorers. They're a very good basketball team. And I think that on any given day can absolutely beat Michigan State, like I mentioned with the top 9 teams. But Minnesota, to me, projected to be a 4 seed in the preseason. To me, Minnesota can absolutely be a 4 seed, can absolutely make the Sweet 16, and be dangerous there. I love those 4 players at the start of it. I don't know how deep they're going to be because they weren't deep a year ago. And you lost one of those guys. You lost one of your starters. But those 4 returning from that team a year ago, I think will be very formidable this year. And even Jordan Murphy, who wasn't supposed to be all that a year ago, finished his last 10 games. 7 of his last 10 were double-doubles. The 2 that didn't, 15 points, 8 rebounds, 13 points, 9 rebounds. It's basically a double-double machine. On the inside, you also add a transfer from Texas A&M, Devontae Fitzgerald, who should be pretty solid. So this Minnesota team is going to be dangerous. No matter who they play, they're going to be dangerous. And if you don't play hard, they will, and they'll beat you. This is one of my favorite teams to watch in the Big Ten this year. Obviously, Michigan State is the juggernaut, and we both like Troy and Penn State, but Minnesota's going to be very fun to watch, in my opinion. If you want, Troy, I can, ask you for your comments on these teams going forward, or you can just interject.
Just quickly. I'm not going to say too much. I mean, you're going to go pretty in depth with your analysis. I'm just going to mention players I like from the team and maybe add a comment or two. I mean, Nate Mason. I think he's the catalyst. He's the guy that's going to be. He's the backbone of that Minnesota team. I know they've got a lot of talent around him, but I think as Nate Mason goes, so does Minnesota. So if Nate Mason's off, the thing I think that's different this year, you look at it, he's got guys that maybe can pick up his game. If he's having an off day, you've got other guys that can pick him up. But at the end of the day, for them to make a deep run, Nate Mason has to be playing good basketball because he's the backbone of that team. He's the catalyst of everything that goes on. And he's going to, if Mason's playing well, I think it's going to bring the level of play up with everybody around him. The difference, though, from last year that I'm thinking, and again, everything's on paper, you don't need Nate Mason to carry your team. You've got other components that can do it. And I think they showed that near the end of the year last year, and then they got hurt. But if you look at the beginning of the year, Kevin, it was Nate Mason this, Nate Mason that. It was all Nate Mason. It had to be Nate Mason. As the year went on, other guys stepped up, And now it'll be interesting to see this year with Minnesota, healthy Minnesota team not having to count on Mason every game or critical possessions. You don't have to say, well, we'll just shut down Mason. You've got other guys on this team that they can go to in a clutch situation. You can almost use them as the decoy at this point. And so hopefully that made sense to everybody, is that the ball doesn't have to go through Mason this year at Minnesota. There's other options. That's what makes them dangerous, Kevin.
Yeah, for sure. I love Mason. I like this Minnesota team a lot. It's going to take a lot for me to not put them probably in the Elite Eight, honestly. To have them lose to a 3 seed or a 4 seed in the Sweet 16, going to be tough for me because I like this Minnesota team a lot. Northwestern, for me, again, like Minnesota, a ton of guys return. Bryant McIntosh, Scotty Lindsey going to lead the backcourt. You've got 2 seniors there in McIntosh and Lindsey coming back from a year ago in the backcourt for you. That's huge in college basketball. Like I mentioned before with Penn State, you have senior guards and they're a couple of your best players. That's a good thing. You still have Victor Law. You still have Derek Perdone. This team returns a lot and their experience. This is a very solid team. Above them in my tier system is Purdue, but Northwestern is going to be very solid all year long, Troy.
Yeah, you mentioned all the key players. The one thing about Northwestern that you're going to get, scrappy little team. And scrappy little teams are always a problem for the big boys. If you were saying Michigan State is probably going to falter somewhere, I could see them faltering at Northwestern. And the reason is the scrappiness of Northwestern. I think now that they've got over that hump, they've got that NCAA bid, they've got that experience, right? I don't think they're afraid of anybody. Nor do I think they were afraid of anybody last year, but now you have that confidence level. Granted, on paper, they're totally outmatched. But you've got a scrappy team. And those scrappy teams, and that's why I love them. And you know me, Kevin. We've known each other long enough. You know me. I'm an old school guy. I like those type of contests where there's scrappiness involved, going after loose balls, boxing out, getting tough rebounds. That's what Northwestern tries to do. They don't do it all the time because the skill level. But you've got guys now that are getting better, that have been together, that are going to be scrappy, and sometimes that's all it is, that extra little effort to save a possession, to not give Michigan State another possession, to get that tough defensive rebound and rip it out of Bridges' hands. That's the way Northwestern plays. That's what I like about them. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention this, too. They've got some darn good players on that team. So you put their skill in with the scrappiness I talked about, that's a pretty darn good combination when you're talking about winning basketball games.
Yeah. I wanted to say this, too. Michigan State's schedule, just to give a little look in at that, and then we'll be done with Michigan State for now, and not that we've got a ton left remaining on the show, but January 26th, they play Wisconsin. That's not going to be a cakewalk. Then they play at Maryland. Then they play Penn State, who Troy and I both like. Then they go to Indiana. That's at Indiana. Indiana's always loud, despite what you think of Indiana this year. It's going to be loud. Michigan State has to show up in that game. Then they go at Iowa. Then they play Purdue at home. Then they play at Minnesota. Then they play at Northwestern. That's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 game stretch that I don't think is easy. There's no cupcakes in there, and Indiana's the worst of them, and that's at Indiana late in the year. And if Michigan State's undefeated and you're playing at Indiana in February, they're going to care. It's going to be loud. You're going to get the best shot from Indiana at their own home court. It's not going to be a cakewalk. So to say Michigan State is the best team in the country, to say that they could finish the Big Ten season, the entire regular season undefeated, yeah, it's possible because they are better than everyone else, in my opinion. But that 8-game stretch alone, not even talking about Duke, not even talking about Maryland in January, not even talking about Notre Dame November 30th. That's a number 13 team in the country. There are a lot of, not as many pit stops as a year ago. Their non-conference is not as atrocious as it was a year ago, but getting into that 8-game stretch and you're undefeated and you're going to have an absolute target on your back. They'll have a target on their back all year long regardless, but especially if you're undefeated, you're getting the best of every Big Ten team, and especially 6 of those 8 games are on the road. That's tough. That's going to be a critical 8-game stretch for Michigan State. If they win all 8 of those, that just truly confirms it to me that they're the best team in the country. That's a while from now, but that's something to look forward to with Michigan State. I'll move on to Purdue. Again, you return basically everyone except for your best player and Swanigan. And Swanigan was the best player in the Big Ten in terms of productivity. A year ago, you can say Bridges is the better talent, but Swanigan was the most productive player in the Big Ten, most productive player in the country, in my opinion, and what he did for that Purdue team. But you return Haas, who's 7'2". You return Carson Edwards, who I love as a sophomore point guard. You return Vince Edwards. You return Dakota Mathias. You return P.J. Thompson. You return Ryan Klein. You've got all these shooters, Mathias, Thompson, Klein. Both Edwards guys can shoot. Haas can't, but he's 7'2". He's a monster on the inside. He's not going to replace Swanigan, but he's going to be a mammoth for teams to deal with, along with these 5 guys on the outside. And this team, I liked Purdue a year ago. I like them again this year. You have a juggernaut in Michigan State, but if Purdue finished number 2 and finished the year, basically with the same record they did a year ago, 27-8, 14-4 in the Big Ten, I think that's completely possible this year. You just have a juggernaut in Michigan State ahead of you. But I like Purdue a lot this year, and that's without Swanigan.
I like Mathias. I think he's a guy. I know you mentioned a lot of guys on that list, Kevin. They have a lot of experience. And, again, I talked about the Penn State experience. Well, you look at this guy, okay, so we lost Swanigan. Well, like you said, we're going to put Haas in there. Probably not as gifted as Swanigan, but still, man, you're 7'2". You're a basketball player. I mean, you're going to lose a little. But like you said, you got Edwards. I just like Mathias. I think he's a guy that probably isn't going to be on a list of a lot of all-conference teams or player of the year. But I think he's a guy that can really step up and really be a contributor. Is he an All-American? No. But, again, I like the gritty guys. And I think you're going to get a guy in Mathias that's going to take on – I don't want to say he's going to be the leader. I think, you look at Edwards there. He's probably the natural leader. But I think they're going to turn to Mathias a lot. He's a guy that, can battle inside. He can shoot from the outside. He can do a lot. I like this Mathias kid from Purdue. I like Purdue also, Kevin. I believe, 3 seniors on their team? 3 seniors come back. After you lose Swanigan, but you've got so much experience. And, they've got guys. I'm not saying you're going to replace the level of Swanigan. But you've got, again, sometimes when you lose talent like that, other guys have to step up, and you become more of a team. And I think that's what you might even see a team in Purdue that is not having to count on one guy. They've got a number of guys that they can go to, and that makes them dangerous.
Yep, for sure. Carson Edwards, the point guard, I love a lot. Like Nate Mason at Minnesota, I think those guys are they're not talked about enough. I love those 2 point guards in the Big Ten. I'll move on to Michigan. You lose Derek Walton, like I mentioned before. That's going to hurt you, but you insert a senior point guard transfer from the MAC in Jaron Simmons, who did well in the MAC, obviously, and is now a senior transfer from Michigan, taking over the point guard duties. I don't know anything about Simmons, but he is one of those classic transfers who does it very well in the Group of 5 conference, transfers, fills a void for a Power 5 team. Who knows how he does? If he does well, then I think Michigan can finish near the top of the league. If not, and you have to focus on Mo Wagner and Duncan Robinson and Abdur Rahman to carry the load, then it may be a little difficult for Michigan. I think that defensively, this team's not that fantastic, but all these guys can shoot it. So Michigan's going to be very dangerous. They're just probably not going to be as dangerous as they were a year ago. I don't think you're going to have this huge hot streak. And defensively, Michigan couldn't lock down a year ago. They're not going to do so without Walton this year. But I think this team is dangerous. They're just not necessarily what they were a year ago. I think you get a lot of sure things in Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue ahead of them. That's why Michigan is outside of those teams, in my opinion. That's why they're not in the top 25, according to the AP. You have some question marks, but you've got a lot of talent. You've got an incoming senior transfer as your point guard. A lot of things can go well, but there can be some nights where they look somewhat lost at times. I think that's all very possible for Michigan this year.
Yeah, they're going to be good. In short, they're going to be good offensively, defensively. That's where the struggles are going to be. So when they play against other teams that are good offensively and against a good defensive team, could give them problems. That's why I think they're middle of the pack for me.
Yeah. Wisconsin, for me, it even extrapolates more than 10 years. Since 2000, the Badgers have finished fourth or better in the Big Ten. I don't know what happened in 1999. I just have the stat of since 2000. They've finished fourth or better in the league. That's incredible. I mean, 17 years straight of finishing in the top four. That's nuts. That's Boise State football in the WAC. That's just insane stuff to think about. But this year, it may not happen. It's very well possible that they don't finish among Michigan State, Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue. Very possible. You obviously have Hap. Trice had some question marks a year ago. Now, can he lead the team at point guard? Khalil Iverson returns. But outside of that, it's like, okay, who do we have left from a year ago? And you have to count on guys, like I mentioned before, in Kobe King, a shooting guard that could end up leading this team in points this year. Brad Davison's another freshman. He's a point guard, probably going to be behind Trice. But those are two interesting names to keep an eye on. Davison is a point guard. King is a two guard. They can help alleviate, and Iverson and Trice can help Hap not have to carry the load. And again, ultimately, if this Badgers team shoots well from the outside and has Hap on the inside, they can be dangerous. If you have to focus on Hap and you're automatically going to shut Wisconsin down because of that, then maybe Wisconsin doesn't make the tournament this year. There's a wide gap, and that's why I have them, obviously down in the 6-7 range, or 7-8 range, or 6-7, sorry, for the Big Ten. To me, I think they finish in there somewhere. But if they miss the tournament, I think it's possible. If they picked up a number 4 or 5 seed because everything goes right, I think that's possible too.
Yeah, well, they could extend the streak, or they could not make the NCAA tournament. It's both ends of the spectrum with this Wisconsin team, and it's all big question mark. You're going to put all your eggs in the basket with Hap, but a lot's going to be involved with what happens off the ball. They're going to play good defense, but can they open up and pull defense away from Hap? I mean, Hap can beat a double team. Hap is good enough to do that. The problem is if you can't hit from the outside and they can now drop another defender down inside, he can't beat 3 guys. And so it's really a lot is going to depend on how the perimeter shooting of the Badgers is. And I'm not talking just the 3-ball, Kevin. Any outside shooting. They've got to get enough to keep teams honest. And if they can't do that, it's going to be long nights. And I have a funny feeling that there's going to be some of those nights. I saw it last year with a senior-laden team, that they couldn't hit from the outside, and it made life a lot more difficult inside. So that's why I said they could extend that streak, or they could not make the NCAA tournament. It's too early for me to tell with this Badger team. Too much inexperience. That's all I got. Yeah.
Moving on to Maryland. You lose Trimble, obviously, but Troy and I both think they're a better team because of it, as weird as that is. Again, your next best 3 players return, all sophomores now: Anthony Cohen, Kevin Herter, Justin Jackson. You're getting a couple NBA guys out of those 3 for sure. I love Herter as a shooter. This team, again, can be dangerous if everything goes wrong. Maybe they do miss the NCAA tournament. They're right there with Wisconsin for me. I think there are a lot of different possibilities to play out, but this team could be dangerous in certain spots, especially if they figure it out without Trimble. Maryland could be a dangerous team this year. That's all I got on them.
I mentioned this before. I like them a lot more than you do. I've got them up near that 4 or 5 range. I like the young kids. I like the experience that they had. I think that experience is going to pay off. You hit it on the head. We both talked about it. I think they're better without Tremble. I think they're going to be a better team. And I mentioned team, and if anybody caught what I said before, it's not the Maryland Trimbles anymore. It's the Maryland Terps, because now you've got a guy, and again, nothing against him, but he was a good college basketball player. The offense went through him. I think the offense can go through 2-3 guys now, not just relying on one guy, and I think that automatically makes them a better team. The experience that they gained last year, I think, is invaluable. I really believe, Kevin, I have them up a little bit higher than you do. I got them up in that 4 or 5 range. I'm not saying they're a lock for the NCAA tournament, because anything can happen, but I think they're a much better team. That's all I got.
Moving on to Iowa, for me, you lose Peter Jack, who actually led the Big Ten in scoring from a year ago. Probably not many people know that. Leading Big Ten scorer came from Iowa. He went to the NBA. So, yeah, a little drop-off there potentially, but you have 3 sophomores. Tyler Cook's a center, Jordan Bohannon, your point guard, Isaiah Moss, a 2-guard. Those guys can score. Luke Garza's a center, a 6'11" freshman, who I mentioned on a Big Ten show that we did primarily in football, I believe a couple months ago, that they got this kid to be a freshman this year. And I think he can make an impact. I think that he will help Iowa a lot on the interior. Again, a 6'11" center freshman who's a pretty good one. I think he's the 10th rated center out of high school. So I think Iowa can do well this year. It certainly can make the NCAA tournament. You also got a 6'6" shooting guard in Connor McCaffrey, who is Fran McCaffrey's kid. He's a freshman this year. He's not bad either. So this team's got a lot of dangerous pieces. You lose obviously the Big Ten leading scorer from a year ago, but in general, I like a lot of these pieces on Iowa's team. Didn't talk about them at all before, but I think this team can be very solid, and you've got some young guys like Garza and obviously the 3 sophomores that I think will lead the team. This is a young team that's going to just continue to get better for the next couple of years, and down the road they could be dangerous if they start clicking as a young team with confidence.
Yeah, I'm not really sold on Iowa. You lose your leading scorer. You've got some formidable pieces there. Just when I look at this roster from top to bottom, Kevin, I'm not sure where is the dominant scoring going to come from. Who's the guy that you're going to give the ball to in a critical situation? Again, it's a prove it to me team. Is there a guy that's going to step up that's going to be the guy in the last 2 minutes when the game's tied and you need a crucial basket? I don't know who on that roster is that guy. You know who it was last year. I don't know who it is this year, and that's very important. How many games are won and lost in the last 2 or 3 minutes, Kevin? A ton. And I don't know who that guy is. I think Iowa falls into that tier of outside of the bubble and near that 7 to 10 range in the Big Ten. They're gonna have a couple big wins, but I just don't know who the guy is. And to me, again, it's prove it. Is there a guy that's going to emerge as the go-to guy in the last 2-3 minutes? If they find that guy, maybe they could, be there on the bubble with the Penn States and the Wisconsins of the world right now. But until then, I don't have them sniffing the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, very good point. We're obviously in, disagreement there. I'm in the optimistic boat for Iowa, and you're saying prove it to me because they haven't yet, those guys on the roster. So, yeah, a very, very fair point for sure. And to go to, Penn State next, I talked about them before already. You have your top 2 players scored from a year ago in Carr and Stevens. You have Shep Garner back. Mike Watkins also back as an interesting piece. 4 of your top 5 scorers are back. That's all I've got on this team. I mean, we talked about Penn State before. Nothing new for me to bring up.
Yeah, we talked probably a little more in-depth note-wise a little bit earlier in the show. This is just I think this is a team, Kevin, that can end their drought of being in the NCAA tournament. Things got to go right, but they've returned a lot of players. They play good defense. They're not going to be a walkover. You're going to have to play your A game when you're playing Penn State. Otherwise, they're going to leave your building, or they're going to leave your building with a win, or you're going to leave their building with a loss if you're one of those teams that are in the upper half of this conference. You better play Penn State tough and not just say, oh, it's Penn State, we can win this game by just showing up. You've got to play. That's all I got on Penn State.
Indiana, our new coach, Archie Miller from Dayton, I believe he's going to be a fresh breath for Indiana just this year, year one, going to be tough. Made the NCAA tournament 4 years straight at Dayton. He's only 39 years old. I fully back him. I fully back the hire. You have one senior guard back from a year ago in Robert Johnson, but you lose Anunoby, who was out for most of last year due to an injury. That absolutely hurt them. You lose Blackman, who both Troy and I love. Troy, you went on about him every time we talked about Indiana. Those losing two NBA guys is going to hurt you, for sure. You have a freshman, 4-star small forward in Justin Smith. He's going to be good down the line. But Archie Miller is 39 years old. He's a good recruiter. He already has 5 different 4-star players committed for 2018 for this team. So this year, year one, it'll be a struggle. I do think it will be. But next year, you're going to see a lot of talented freshmen, and you're going to have a couple sophomores at this point. This time next year, that'll be leading the team. I think Indiana will be one of those sexy picks as a dark horse NCAA team and maybe can be a little dangerous next year. But this year, year one, losing a lot from a year ago, it'll be tough for Indiana this year, but the future looks bright already.
It looks bright. You just got to give Archie a few years to get his guys in there. I think Archie's a good coach, and I think Archie will have a chance to turn that program around. The only problem I have is, are they going to give him time? You know how fickle some of these big-time schools are, and Indiana's a basketball school, and they've already lost to Indiana State. So I'm sure the boosters are like, oh, the rumblings. I'm writing checks for thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you lose to Indiana State. What are you doing, Archie? It's one game. It's one game with not the roster that he probably wants. You got to give him time. You got to just let the leash go. Let Archie do his thing. He's gonna be a good coach, but he's got to get acclimated. Because I'm going to say this: the Big Ten. Again, I'm not going to go as far as saying the best conference in the United States or in America, but it's a damn competitive conference, Kevin. Really, when you look at it, teams up until even this point, could Indiana pull an upset? Sure, they could. But they're not going to be consistently being like, oh, yeah, watch out for this Indiana team. But the Big Ten is a different place to coach, and Archie's got to get acclimated to the Big Ten. He's got to get used to coaching in the Big Ten. A little bit different from where he's been, a little bit different style of play, but I think Archie will be just fine. But Indiana won't be this year.
For sure. They lost to Indiana State 90-69. So they lost the game by 21 points. They lost the first half by 21 points. In short, again, this is what happens when you play one game. Anything can happen. Indiana State made 17 of 26 three balls. You give up 17 threes in one game, you're going to lose in college basketball. It doesn't matter who you are. So to make 2/3 of your threes, to make 17 of them, that's not happening again for Indiana State this year. I guarantee it. That game.
Well, if that happens every game against them, Archie Miller might think about retiring. I mean, that's just, it's not something that's going to happen every game. Teams aren't going to shoot 67% from 3-point. It could happen a number of times, but not every night. And if it does, I'd be like, oh, bad luck, Archie. Bad luck, Archie. Because that's, or either it's really poor defense by leaving them get open looks. But, yeah, it's one of those things, Kevin. You've watched games like that where a team just can't miss from 3. And that happens. Just sucks for him that it was game 1 against Indiana State.
Yeah, for sure. Don't want to start your career at Indiana losing to an in-state. You can't even call them a rival because they're not of your class. But I'll move on to Ohio State. Chris Holtmann from Butler. I like the hire as well. I think he'll do well. Getting 3 seniors, like I mentioned before, Jay-Sean Tate, Kata Bates-Job, Cam Williams. They're 3 guys who are talented. They should be solid, those 3. But do they care enough? Again, a year ago, they didn't care. That team just looked like crap in general. You also add with those 3 seniors a couple talented freshmen who were Butler commits, and Caleb Wesson, Kyle Young. They're also talented players. I think they'll buy into Holtman for sure because they did while he was at Butler when they were just a recruit. So I think you've got some talent on this roster. And in general, I mean, to be better than Indiana, I think very possible. I have them in the same tier, but talent-wise, they're absolutely better than Indiana. I just don't think they'll be as solid and consistent as your Iowas, your Penn States, and teams above them in the Big Ten this year.
I don't got much to comment on Ohio State. Ohio State's a football school, so they get. I mean, they really are. Let's be honest about it. We're probably not going to be talking about Ohio State making a run to the NCAA tournament, maybe in a couple of years. Like you said, Holtman's a good hire, but again, too, he's got to get acclimated to do some different things. I know everybody's high on him, but you look at it, this is the Big Ten. Right now, you're one of the lower teams in the Big Ten. You've got to get the talent in there. Like you said, I don't even see them doing much. I don't see them getting into the top 10 of this conference, Kevin. Nobody stands out to me. I don't know what kind of style he's going to play. Maybe he catches a team off guard with a different style of play. But at the end of the day, it's Big Ten basketball, and you got to play good defense. You got to have guys that can hit from the perimeter, and you got to have a big. You got to have a big in the middle. You got to have a big, and that's college basketball. And so, where is that all coming from at Ohio State? I don't know. I don't see it. I don't think they break into the top 10. Maybe in weeks 1 and 2, maybe they can go 1-1 or 1-0 or 2-0, something like that, and be in the top 5. But when the season's all said and done, they're going to be 11 through 14.
Fair enough. I think they can finish 10 just because you have teams 10 through 14 outside of Ohio State are Indiana, Nebraska, Illinois, Rutgers. So I think Ohio State can be the best of those 5. But, yeah, 10 is the ceiling to me for Ohio State. With Nebraska, you got your junior point guard, Glenn Watson, back. He's pretty good. Isaac Copeland, a transfer from Georgetown, top 25 recruit when he was coming out of high school. Obviously didn't work at Georgetown, so he moves to Nebraska. That's not a fantastic thing to have to move, being a big-time recruit and having to kind of go down, so to say, because you're having to transfer from the team that loved you when you were a big-time recruit. But you also have a freshman in Thomas Allen who could be impactful. This team's searching for answers, and having to take in a big-time recruit from another school, it just leaves you to wonder why he had to leave. And so if you're counting on the junior point guard who's decent, and that's kind of it, and then you've got a bunch of question marks, this could be the worst team in the Big Ten. Nebraska, I've got Rutgers down there, but Nebraska, it's going to be tough for them.
I don't have Rutgers down there.
I know you don't.
I don't have them down there. This could be the team that finishes 14th.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say. Again, you look at what's on the roster. Copeland, honest, Kevin, that's a good addition, but, man, you're going to Nebraska. I mean,
right.
There's just, like you said, this is a team that you say searching. What's the identity of Nebraska? It's not good defense. It's not great outside shooting. It's no domination in the middle. 3 things I just talked about that you have to have in the Big Ten. They're going to struggle. They're going to struggle, and some of these games could get ugly with Nebraska.
For sure. Illinois, new coach, Brad Underwood, like I mentioned before, from Oklahoma State. He likes to score. You have a senior guard transferring from Wright State who can score at Wright State, so I'm sure he will have his games. Mark Alstork is his name. I know nothing about him other than that he came from Wright State and he can score. You pair him with Underwood, and I'm sure he'll be able to score. You have a top 100 recruit in Mark Smith, who's also a guard. That backcourt could be interesting at times, so I think they're more interesting than Nebraska for sure. I like Underwood as a coach going forward. Just this year, they're young outside of the transfer. So this team is going to be building an identity with Underwood. You've got some interesting guards with you at Illinois, which is a good thing with a coach that loves to score. I'm sure Illinois will be fun to watch at times. But again, the consistency in top to bottom on this roster, it's just not of the same level as the top 9 teams in this conference.
Well, it's great that you want to love to score. The problem is, can you stop anybody else from scoring? That was Illinois' problem last year. They're not getting better with Underwood. He's an offensive guy, and that's fine. Like you said, maybe bring some fun to the Big Ten. The thing is, I think Big Ten basketball is already fun. But he's gonna try to bring in a different style of play. I just talked about the Big Ten being a different style of play. We'll see if it works. The thing is, you've got to have talent to do it. If he brings in the right guys, maybe in a year or two he can do it. I don't think he does it with this roster. And it could be maybe I should move Rutgers to 12. Because this Illinois team, they're going to struggle. They're going to win some games, too, because they're going to try to outscore teams. The problem you're going to face is you've got lockdown defenses near the top of this league. Michigan State, Purdue, Northwestern. Penn State's not even at the top of the conference, and they've got a great defense. Wisconsin, middle of the pack. They play good defense. What are they going to do against really good defenses? Because you got to remember where Underwood came from. That was the identity of that conference. You got to outscore your opponent. They didn't put an emphasis on defense like the Big Ten does. Look at these teams that we talked about, Kevin, and we can probably list defense as a positive for that team, and probably over half the teams in the conference know and play good defense. So what is going to happen when you play those good defensive teams that limit you to one possession? Are you going to shoot 80% from the field? Hell no, you're not. That could really be a lot of losses for Illinois. I'm really thinking about moving Rutgers to 12 after I just said that. I think I may have convinced myself that Rutgers might be number 12.
Sometimes you have to talk things out, not to go away from sports, but if you say a certain thing out loud, it can be different. And I was taught that in college that, just talk out loud. Whatever you're writing, whatever your paper is, whatever your little sports article is, say it out loud, read it out loud, see if it makes sense, because maybe grammatically just looking at it on a computer screen, it looks correct, but it just comes out wrong from your mouth. So things can be just different coming out of your mouth, and that happens to me too, Troy. I mean, I have notes in front of me every show we do, but after I say something, it's like, my God, maybe I like Iowa more than I did, or maybe I don't like Maryland as much as I did, or whatever the case is. I'm not getting into specific examples, but sometimes you just have your little notes with you, or you don't have notes. You just talk things out, and it's just you feel differently after talking out for a minute. So I fully understand that, having your mind change based on just whatever you say for a minute. I'll move on, though, to Rutgers. Rutgers is the last team for me. You have Corey Sanders, who's a junior guard, and he can score. Otherwise, outside of Sanders, you've got a bunch of freshmen. This is Steve Pickiel, I believe his name is. It's his second year with Rutgers, so he's starting to build something. He's got a few interesting freshmen. Geo Baker's a freshman guard who could be interesting. There's another name out there. I thought I had another name outside of this one kid, but this one kid is going to be a 17-year-old freshman, Mamadou Dukore. I don't know if that's how you say his last name. Maybe I'm butchering Mamadou incorrectly as well, but a 6'9", 220 big who reclassified from the 2018 class to 2017. So again, he's a 17-year-old freshman. He was a 4-star guy for 2018. Now he's moving up a class. He's going to be the show at Rutgers outside of Corey Sanders. DeCore will be one guy to watch, if I'm saying his name correctly. Sanders, a guy to watch at Rutgers as well. Again, the Joe Baker freshman guard could be interesting too. This is a young team outside of Sanders, but DeCore, I mean, depending on how good he is, yeah, you could see Rutgers upset some people, finish 12th in the league. They may not be the bottom dweller. I think they are because I don't know what DeCore will be. I don't know what Baker will be. I know Sanders can score as a junior, but that's all I know for Rutgers. There are a lot of question marks, but start getting to the bottom of any conference in the country, and there are a lot of question marks on those teams toward the bottom.
No, I know they're just not good. They're just not good, but I got to jump, and I've got to make bold predictions. And the thing is, you look at Rutgers, and really we talked about Rutgers as a whole athletic program. We talked about this year football, that they've won a few games. And I'm not saying that momentum is going to carry over, but Rutgers is a team that is just not known for athletic prowess, where they're going to dominate in the conference. However, they're returning some guys, and like you said, these young guys that I was reading about, again, I know nothing about them. I've never watched them play like you, but what I'm reading is they're supposed to be fun to watch. Maybe they're a spark plug. They're returning some guys that have played in the Big Ten. They know what Big Ten basketball is about. They are. They're outclassed, but I look at it, there's so many question marks. Those teams that are 10 through 14, really, honestly, I talked to Kevin about putting 2 through 8 in a hat and picking them out. You could do that with 10 through 14 and then try to get your 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 team in this conference. But, yeah, I just want to jump on a bandwagon. I'm going to jump on Penn State bandwagon. I really think they're getting the short end of the stick. These are my last notes, and we can go in. We're 2 hours into this show, which is a lot longer than I thought we would go. But I think Penn State, my big takeaway is Penn State not getting any love from the media, and I don't know why. I think they're a very good team. And then I'm going to jump on the Rutgers bandwagon. I'm going to cheer for Rutgers. I'm going to cheer for Penn State. I mean, I'm going to cheer for a lot of teams. I'm going to cheer for the Big Ten. This is a Big Ten show. We love all the teams, believe it or not, even though Kevin and I – well, Kevin's doesn't have his favorite team. His is Duke, by the way. Just so those listening for the first time, his favorite team is Duke. Mine is Wisconsin because I'm from Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsin homer when it comes to being a fan. But you'll find out on this show, and you probably heard for the last 2 hours, I am not high on Wisconsin. And I will always be honest and straightforward with my answers. I don't let my fan part, Kevin, and you know this, doing a number of shows with me. I don't let the fan in me ever get in the way of me doing the show and giving a true, honest analysis of what's going on.
Yep, and that's why I like doing shows with you, because you can give honest analysis even on your favorite teams. And as we're doing the show, I have Minnesota and Providence on in the background. Week 2 of the college basketball season for the Big Ten is when it really you start to see non-conference matchups that are interesting. And Minnesota-Providence on the screen at Providence. That's a real game for Minnesota. They're losing right now by 5 in the first half. That's a real game. So I think we're going to see occasionally from this point forward, there are going to be some interesting games to talk about. And some of these games the committee will look back on and say, hey, you're a number 7 seed because of, a couple of these wins in the non-conference, as opposed to an 8. And again, if you're a 7 seed, say you're South Carolina. You're a 7 seed last year because of what you did to start the year. They started off red hot. They finished the year 3-9 going into the NCAA tournament. So it's like, okay, where do we put this team? Well, we'll stick them as a 7 seed because they started out red hot and then they went to crap. So you're a 7. Well, being a 7 instead of an 8 means you get Duke, who's a really young team in the second round a year ago. If you're an 8 seed, a 9 seed, maybe you get Kansas, like Michigan State did. It's just a juggernaut. Maybe South Carolina's done. But instead, South Carolina beats Duke, and boom, they go on this magical run. And it's like, wow, where'd this come from? Well, this came from the beginning of the year when they showed you that they have a bunch of senior guys who are tough and can play defense and can knock down shots, and they get hot in a tournament. That's what happened for South Carolina. So, yes, seeding matters a lot more than people think, in my opinion. Yes, coaches will tell you it's all about the matchups, but seeding, if you're a 7 seed as opposed to an 8, you have a mile-long difference potentially. If you're playing Duke, a young Duke team from a year ago, compared to Kansas, who's got a bunch of seniors on its team, it's night and day. So being a 7 seed instead of an 8 a year ago makes all the difference in the world. For Wisconsin, Villanova, if Villanova plays a different 8 seed than Wisconsin in the second round, I'm sure Villanova moves on. Instead, you got a senior-laden Wisconsin team. Unfortunately for them, the committee downplayed Wisconsin to an 8 seed. We thought they should have probably been a 6, 5 or a 6. I remember it on the show. They got an 8 seed, and it's like, wow, that's pretty low. Well, they proved it against Villanova a year ago. So seeding absolutely matters. These games matter. But in short, you want to be playing your best basketball typically toward going into the NCAA tournament. But so from last week, the first week of the season, college basketball, I have no notes on anything that took place because, like you said, Troy, to start the show, every team won except Indiana losing to Indiana State when they hit 17 threes. That just is what it is. That was week 1 of the college.
Yeah, and it's, Kevin, what that is, it's, most of those are cupcakes, so there's nothing of importance. I know you wanted to get into the game on Tuesday night, so again, if you're listening to this after Tuesday, you already know the result, but Kevin is going to give his quick analysis of Michigan State Duke. We've kept you here for 2 hours. We do appreciate you listening every week. But I know, Kevin, you wanted to talk about Duke, Michigan State, so take it away.
Yeah, and we won't go longer than 2 hours probably ever again on the show. We didn't last year. But to, recap last year and give a whole preview this year, it takes a while. Unfortunately, for some, fortunately for others. But Minnesota at Providence, like I mentioned, Monday night, be interesting to see who wins that game. That's a solid game for Minnesota. Tuesday, the 14th, nothing big in the Big Ten. Although I shouldn't say that. Outside of Duke, Michigan State, Purdue goes to Marquette, which is a real game for sure. Marquette proved a year ago they were like the number 2 3-point shooting team in the country last year. That's why they were, I think, a 10 seed when they played South Carolina in the first round and lost. But regardless, Marquette's a real school. Obviously, we both come from Wisconsin, Troy. Me in a different sense than you, but we both lived in Wisconsin for a number of years. We understand Marquette. That's a real school. So Purdue at Marquette, interesting game on Tuesday night. If you absolutely don't want to watch Duke, Michigan State, that's the headliner, really, for the entire year. That, to me, is the national championship preview, in my opinion. Duke, you have just a bunch of talented freshmen from top to bottom as far as point guard through center. That's really what they are. You've got a bunch of talented freshmen. That's what Duke is. You have Grayson Allen back. That's who you have returning, basically. Then you've got just a ton of freshmen. You got a couple sophomores sprinkled in there. But Grayson Allen is the senior leader, and then you've got just a bunch of talented freshmen who are potentially number 1 picks in the draft for 2018. You've got Bagley inside, banging against Michigan State's bigs in Ward and Bridges and Jackson. Bagley versus Jackson, 2 freshmen, top 10 recruits. Just the matchups across the board. I'm not going to get too in-depth with this game because it's a November game in college basketball, non-conference. But I think that if you can watch this game, just watch it. It's taking place in Chicago. So no team will have true home court advantage. I'm sure Duke will travel well to Chicago, and I'm sure Michigan State will as well. So be a very fun atmosphere. To me, it's the preview to the college basketball championship game. I obviously love Duke. That's my team. But Michigan State is the team I think that's going to win the whole thing. I seriously think these are the 2 best teams in the country. Michigan State's just better, in my opinion, because of their experience and overall depth that you count on. That's a known commodity as opposed to Duke, which is just a bunch of freshmen with Grayson Allen. So unbelievable game. If you can watch it, watch it. I'm not going to get into, X's and O's and the keys of it, but it's going to be a fun one, 7 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday, November 14th on ESPN.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one, Kevin, for sure. I give the advantage, of course, to Michigan State. As I mentioned, their second unit could battle to be the second or third team in the Big Ten. And I think ultimately when you play against a team like Duke, yeah, they're going to have good bench play too. But you can do a lot more when you know you don't have a huge drop-off going to your second unit. They literally can go from their first to second unit and not have a big drop-off. So it'll be fun. And again, Kevin and I thank you for joining us on this long, I guess, Big Ten preview show. Join us every week. Check out thegruelingtruth.net. That's where you're listening to us every week. We have a show for basketball and football. Have a good night, everyone.